Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Welcome to another video. Really excited for everyone to be back for another step in our Linux journey. And quite interesting, I am on travel right now and we are driving to our destination. But while I am driving, and of course we took a little break here because we're not going to record and actually drive and record. Although, interestingly enough, the vehicle does have full self-driving, so it actually does drive by itself. But we're not going to record and do that, that's unsafe. But more importantly, back to business now, another step in our Linux journey. And so in this video, we're going to talk all about file system permission. This is an interesting topic and it's going to be broken up into three parts. And of course, there's a lot of information to go over, which is why we broke it up into three parts. But if this is your first time on the channel and it's your first time watching the video up until this point, make sure you check out the description. I always put the latest and greatest information on there. And also as well too, there's a link to our Linux playlist. Watch the other videos and then come to this one because there's some things that we're going to go over that you may miss, as in you won't understand, because our topics, they all build on ideas that we've learned from the past. Make sure you're up to date, and then afterwards come back to this video and watch this video as we take that next step in that journey. So before we jump into the topic, make sure you give me a like for the video as it helps the channel grow. Go ahead and subscribe to the channel and turn on your notifications so that way you know when we upload to the channel. And of course, share this video with a family member or friend so that way they can also learn. So let's go ahead and jump into part 2, and I'll see you guys on the other side. Hey everyone, welcome to the desktop. And by now, this environment should be very, very familiar to you. And we already have our terminal up, so we're not going to go into the basics of how do you bring up the terminal. And if this is your first time on the channel and you don't even know what a terminal is, make sure you check out the description, as the description will have all the latest and greatest on the channel. But more importantly, there'll be a link to our Linux playlist, and you can go check that out so that way you can follow along and you can learn everything that there is to know to get you up to this point. And again, we build on concepts and ideas, so this is only going to get harder if you start at a point in time and you have no idea what I'm talking about. So again, if you're new or you haven't seen some of those videos from the past, go check out the description and go check out those videos so that way you can get all caught up. So with housekeeping out of the way, guys, welcome back to another video. Welcome to another step in your Linux journey. And in today's lesson, we're going to talk about an essential topic that everyone should know when you're working with Linux, and that is file system permissions. Some of the things that we'll talk about today are how to change your permissions, how do you control the default permissions, and by the end of this tutorial, you guys will have a solid understanding of how to manage file permissions and ownership in Linux. So let's go ahead and get started. So how do we go about changing the ownership of a file or a particular directory? Now, in order for me to show you guys this, I want to add a user to this particular box. And of course, this shouldn't be new to you because we've done this already. And if you're not familiar with how to add a user, or you want to take a look at that video, go ahead and check out that playlist, because again, there's a video showing you how to go ahead and adding users. So I'm going to add, let's say sudo user add, and we're going to call this user Costa E.T.F. So we have a new user on the box. We're looking at this myfile2 that we have here, .txt. So the myfile2.txt, we want to change ownership of this particular file, and instead of having El Acosta on here like you see, let's go ahead and give that ownership over to Acosta E.T.F, which is our new user over here. And remember, there's a couple of ways that we can see this user on the box. I've showed you that in previous videos, but real quickly, we can use the ID command and point it to Acosta E.T.F. And we can see that Acosta E.T.F has a UID of 1001, has a GID of 1001, and is associated with that one particular group. So if we were to take a look now and say, okay, let's change ownership from El Acosta to Acosta E.T.F for myfile2, we can do sudo in order to elevate our privileges, and we use the chown command. And here is where you give it your first argument, and your first argument is who is the new user, and the new user is going to be Acosta E.T.F, followed by the second argument. And the second argument is the actual file that you're looking to change the permissions on, or should I say ownership. So we're going to call myfile2.txt because we're interested in changing the ownership. So if we hit enter on that, let's go ahead and do an ls-l on myfile2. And you can see now that we changed the ownership from L Acosta to Acosta E.T.F. So Acosta E.T.F. now has the ability to read and write because they own the file now. You may be asking yourself now, well, we just changed the owner of the file. How do we change the group of the file, right? Because we want that to be another group. And so we can do sudo in order to elevate our privileges, chgrp or change group. We want the new group. Let's say the new group is going to be Acosta E.T.F, and that's going to be with this GID of 1001 over here. And we want to target the file, myfile2. So this command is very similar to the chown command or change ownership, except this one is change group. And of course, you have the first argument, which is what group is going to be the new group, so Acosta E.T.F. And then second argument is what is the file that you're looking to target. And of course, it's the myfile2.txt. So let's go ahead and hit enter on that. Let's go ahead and do ls-l on the file now. And you can see that the group was changed from L Acosta to Acosta E.T.F. Now, interestingly enough, if we go back to the previous section of what we learned, well, the user, which is now Acosta E.T.F, has the ability to read, write, but not execute. Who's ever part of the group, Acosta E.T.F, has the ability to read, write, and execute. And everybody else on the box has the ability to read, can't write, but can execute. So with those permissions now, because I am logged in as L Acosta over here, that means that I now fall into the others because I've effectively changed the user and the group ownership of this particular file. So meaning I shouldn't have the ability to write to this file. So let's test that out. If I were to do a vi myfile2, I could already see in the bottom that it tells me it's a read-only file. So let's say hello. Let's escape, right quit. You could already see it's giving me an error saying this is a read-only file. So let's just quit, an exclamation point, because yes, I really want to quit. So that proves the point of two things. Number one, you just saw how I was able to change ownership of a file, and that ownership was both from a user perspective and a group perspective. But then you also got to see how it directly impacted the permissions of that particular file because I no longer was the owner of the file and I was no longer associated with the group of that file. So it's very, very important that you're seeing how that works hand in hand together between file ownership and also as well permissions of that file. And the same thing applies for a directory. Pretty cool. So moving on to the next section now, we're going to talk a little bit about how do we control default permissions. So you may be asking yourself, whenever you create a file on a particular Linux box, there's some permissions that are automatically given by default. So what are those default permissions? Well, let's take a look. If we were to go back to our terminal and we use the touch command, use touch, and let's call this file default perm, which is short for permissions. And we can end that with a .txt, just to give us the ability to understand that, hey, this is a text file, even though necessarily there's no such thing as extensions in Linux. So now if I were to do an ls-l on default perm.txt, we can see here that we have automatically the users get read, write, no execute, groups get read, write, no execute, and everybody else gets read, no write, and no execute. So now that you see default permissions were given to this particular file, you may be asking, well, how did that happen? And this is something where in the Linux world we call a umask. And in order to control the default permission, we have this umask, and basically it's a command in order to set default permissions for new files and directories that are created. And you can figure out what your umask is by typing in umask. And so, as you see here, my umask is 002. And we can talk a little bit about what that fourth zero is, or in the particular case that I'm talking about, the first zero. We can talk about that if you're interested. Leave me a comment in the comment section below. But in this particular case, what we really care about for a umask at this stage of the game is the last three numbers. So it's 002. So in a nutshell, the umask value is subtracted from the default permissions of files and directories in order to give you the result permissions. So you may be asking, well, what is the default? Well, when it comes to files, you have 666. And when it comes to directories, you have 777. So in the case where we created a file here, we have a default permission of 666. That gets subtracted from 002, which gives you your default permissions of read, write, but no execute, read, write, but no execute, read, no write, and no execute. That's the 9 set that you're seeing there. Now, interestingly enough, you may be saying, well, okay, you explained that, but I still don't get it. And this goes back to what I was telling you before. Remember when I told you guys when it comes to those permissions, you have two ways of doing it. You have the symbolic way of doing it, and you also have the numeric way of doing it. Well, this is where exactly the numeric side comes into play. If you understand the numeric side, then you'll be able to understand what a umask is and what exactly it's doing from a calculations perspective if you want to understand that. That's why it's critical to really understand from a numeric perspective what is happening, because it applies to other areas such as the umask here. Now, when it comes to umask, I'm just going to explain it from a high level there, but if you're interested in me creating another video that dives deep into how a umask is calculated and you want to see it from the numeric side, leave me a comment in the comment section below, and if enough people are interested, we'll go ahead and make a video on that. Now, if you're interested in saying, well, how do I go about changing the umask in order to set my default permissions, you can do the command umask, and then you can apply a specific umask that you're interested in. So let's just say 022. Now, if we do umask again, you can see that it was changed from 002 to 022. Now, if I were to create a new file now, let's say touch new umask.txt, and we hit enter. Now, if I were to do an ls-l on that new umask.txt file, you're going to see different permissions from what you saw before, because we changed the umask, which automatically changes the default permissions of a file or directories. So if we were to use the previous definition that we used before, we take, in the case of files, it's 666, or in the case of directories, it's 777. So since this is a file, we start off with 666, and then we subtract the umask, which would be, in this case now, 022, and that gives you 644, which is going to be the default permissions now for this new file that I created. And what does 644 mean? Well, 644, and if you know the numeric permissions now, you can understand that the user is going to have read, write, but no execute. Groups are going to have read only, so no writing and no executing ability. And then, of course, same thing applies with others. Others is going to have read only, because that is what for means in the numeric side. So I should see read, write, only read, and only read. That should be my permissions. So let's go ahead and do an ls-l on new umask, and what do you know, just like that, our permissions were adjusted accordingly. So the user has read, write, no execute, the groups have only read, and everybody else in the world has only read. And again, that is 6, 4, and 4. So this is a perfect example of why I say, yeah, the symbolic is great to understand, but when you know the numeric side, and the numeric side seems a little difficult at first, but again, once you watch that video, you'll understand it. You can see how it's going to help you in other areas. It's crucial that you understand how to change the permissions numerically. All right, so I want to adjust my umask back to 002. Let's double check that again, if I can type the command correctly. All right, so I'm back to 002. Welcome back, everyone. Hopefully the video has helped you out a lot and you learned a thing or two about file system permissions. Now, I say this in every video, Rome wasn't built in a day, so take your time, but also as well practice. Practice makes perfect. My first time doing this, it was very difficult for me to understand and I did struggle through it. If you didn't get the concepts that we just talked about today, make sure you go ahead and rewatch the video. Make sure you see it over and over again. Again, practice makes perfect. So not only do you watch the videos, but go ahead and actually try what you're learning in the videos. Also, make sure you check out the description, as we always put the latest and greatest information on there. Also, if you want to check out any of the previous videos or you want to rewatch something in order to practice again, as I always say, check out the link in the description for our Linux playlist. If this video has helped you out, make sure you give me a like for the video, as it helps the channel grow. Make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on your notifications, so that way you're notified whenever we upload new videos to the channel. Because again, we're doing a lot of cool videos on tech, engineering, and also as well money topics, or finances as I call them. And lastly, share the video with a family member or friend, so that way they can also learn. And so I gotta get to my next destination, guys. So I will see you all in the next video.